We aren't even 30 days into 2026, and the Pokemon fan project scene has already begun to pop off with tons of new and exciting experiences. So today, I'll be showcasing the best Pokemon fan games and ROM hacks that were released or updated in the month of January. Keep in mind that this is a monthly series, so definitely subscribe to never miss out on any future uploads. But before we continue, I'd like to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Doki Monsters Quest, that is now available on iOS devices. In this game, you'll travel across a massive world built using a charming Game Boy Color inspired art style. Lurking about are over 140 unique monsters for you to collect, train, and use in battle. Although, unlike the older games this one takes inspiration from, you'll find a hefty amount of quality of life. The stat points and moves of your monsters can be modified at any point, and battles can be sped up by simply holding down the spacebar or button on screen. These will certainly come in handy as you battle both other rangers and evil corporations threatening the world's peace. But like I said at the beginning, the game has just launched on the iOS App Store, allowing you to enjoy this retro monster taming experience conveniently on your phone for only $3.99 USD. Even if you had played it years prior and had a negative experience, the game has received significant free updates since its original release. So if you're looking for a retro monster taming experience with more modern gameplay features, then check out the link in the description or pinned comment to begin Doki Monsters Quest on either your PC, Nintendo Switch, or mobile device. Kicking things off is an update to Pokemon Keisho, an already completed fan game that the developer continues to polish over time. In this game, you'll play as a brand new trainer who's been tasked with taking on the island's 8 clan leaders in order to become the Lord of the Elder. The story definitely isn't this game's selling point, yet it's not one that'll bore you into oblivion or take too much time away from the adventure. Speaking of the adventure, this is very much where Keisho shines the brightest. While the region might look a little small on paper, I promise it is absolutely massive. You'll venture through dozens of unique routes, explore huge cities, and fight your way through various dungeons. Best of all, it can be progressed in any order you desire. My only complaint about the world is that there is a noticeable amount of overworld graphics that do clash with each other, though it's not something that ever made me feel like dropping the game, so I'll be giving the adventure a personal score of 8 out of 10. But this is still a Pokemon game, and if there's one thing that matters above all else, it's the quality of the gameplay. Keisho is very big on quantity, with nearly every Pokemon across all 9 generations, Terastallization, Dynamax, and even Mega Evolution. How does all this translate to good battles though? Well, you'll have the EXP to alleviate the overwhelming Pokemon variety, and a number of items to modify certain battle mechanics. That, alongside 4 difficulty modes, makes the challenge level very customizable. I can't see myself giving the QOL a personal score of less than 9 out of 10, but with how easy I felt the battles became later on in the game, I will be giving the gameplay a 7 out of 10. Overall, Keisho is a really fun fan game that I highly suggest to anyone who wants a big region to explore with a lot of Pokemon at their disposal. Gen 3 ROM hacks that introduce Pokemon from newer generations are pretty common, and while not as abundant, Gen 4 hacks of similar concept have recently begun to pop up as well. But what about Generation 5? Well, let me introduce you to Pokemon Blinding White 2, a hack that adds a handful of Pokemon from Generations 6 and 7. And as cool as that is, this hack does 2 things that, in my opinion, seriously separate it from other Generation 5 enhancement projects. Blinding White 2 makes every Pokemon battle much more unique and interesting. You'll of course find the expected stat and learn set buffs, though alongside that comes reworks to a ton of existing moves alongside a handful of new ones. And if you're a fan of Nuzlockes, many towns or other areas previously without an encounter now possess one. But even though this hack seems to be primarily designed for said challenge, the difficulty of boss battles on the normal mode felt extremely balanced and not at all overwhelming. Though on top of fun battles, the hack also provides a plethora of quality of life features. From the very start of the game, you'll find an NPC that'll offer you infinite rare candies, healing items, repels, or even the option to enable a randomizer. While I don't usually gravitate towards enhancement hacks, Blinding White 2 has a lot of unique features that, on top of the insane QOL, definitely makes it one of the best ways to experience Unova. Up next is something a little different, a tower defense game called Pokepath TD. Tower defense fan games have always been pretty uncommon, with the two original Pokemon TD games last updated over a decade ago, and really only one other that comes to mind, released just last year. So I was initially pretty surprised to see how popular this one became in such a short amount of time, but after playing it myself, I can see exactly why. Pokepath TD has a very simple introduction, where you pick your starter and then place it on the board. Pokemon can be purchased through randomized eggs in the shop, and their level can be increased using the money gained from defeating enemies. Each unit has their own semi-unique ability that occasionally grows in strength upon evolution. Though, unlike most tower defense games I've personally played, the gameplay loop isn't always just leaving a unit where you initially placed it and watching it slaughter everything that comes their way. As you progress through the stages or waves, you'll need to quickly rearrange their placements, since you won't always have enough units to cover every inch of the field. Alternatively, you can just AFK the same round over and over again until you get enough money to not have to worry about that. Either way, Pokepath TD is not only fun, but also really easy to understand the core concepts of. And best of all, you can either choose to download the game to your PC, or play it through the official site that'll even run on your mobile device. Now, hold on a second. Isn't this Pokemon Xenoverse? What could a game finished almost 5 years ago possibly be doing in this video? Well, this is actually a full remake of the game, with of course permission from the original developers. If you're a longtime viewer of my content, you may be aware of my critical opinions regarding this game. I found the story to be very unrewarding and disappointing, the balance of the new Pokemon very messy, and the game as a whole operating way slower than I felt it needed to. And at first glance, I honestly thought this was just going to make the battles harder, like some other mods for popular fan games. But it actually changes so much that I think giving it its own segment is very justified. The first thing this remake drastically improves over the original is gameplay. On top of the existing ones being obtainable much earlier, you'll find a collection of new Fakemon have been added to the game, and important boss fights have been given updates to their rosters. These updates don't significantly up the challenge across the board, rather, in my opinion, split their team's power more evenly so that each of their Pokemon actually feel threatening and rewarding to defeat. But my favorite aspect of the new gameplay was easily the boss battles. They're now much harder, trigger unique effects upon depleting their health bars, and are now fought in a 2 vs 1 format. I'll give the gameplay a personal score of 8.5 out of 10. Though I've always believed harder fights should come with strong QOL, which this remake does not fail to deliver. Instead of needing to grind for EVs, you can simply allocate them at any point with a pool that's increased each level. On top of that, the game's achievement system now actually provides rewards you can claim at any Pokemon Center. And of course, you still have the EXP all, which felt a lot more balanced this time around due to the increased level curve. With that said, I think the QOL deserves an 8 out of 10, with my only real complaint being that I wish the base battle speed was a bit quicker. Onto the story, which, yes, this game does in fact make changes to. So far, it still progresses very similar to the original, yet the characters and important story beats feel so much more fleshed out. The dialogue across the board feels more polished, with even some new cutscenes to expand on some of the more lackluster plot points. With a 7 out of 10 to the current story, the remake is overall a significant improvement to the original. Though it only has half the main story content available at the moment, I seriously believe it'll be the universally preferred way to experience the game when it's finally finished. But before we continue, I'd like to go over a few honorable mentions. Projects that maybe don't have as much to offer as the rest of the list, yet in my opinion, still deserve to be here. The first one is Pokemon Rose Gold, an NDS hack that follows the adventures of Red through Mount Silver. To give the player a fulfilling experience, you'll of course find a ton of brand new maps meant to represent the treacherous terrain of Johto's northern mountains. Lurking about in these new areas though, are plenty of powerful trainers that'll require your full strength to overcome. Thankfully, you are provided with a somewhat overwhelming number of items to deal with these challenges, and the wild Pokemon encounters aren't much weaker than those of the enemy trainers. Its current demo contains around 1 to 2 hours of gameplay, which is about half as long as the planned full game. But it's still very fun, and I highly suggest you at least keep your eye on it. Next is Silver Chronicles, a fan game where you can explore Johto, Kanto, and even the Orange Islands with a new new story after completing Johto. If you're wondering why this game sits in this section of the video, it's really only because I covered it very recently and thought it would be a bit rude to spend a few minutes basically repeating myself. So if the concept sounds interesting to you, I highly suggest checking out my full review that I'll leave a link to in the description below. And finally is Pokemon Emerald Squared, a doubles-based difficulty hack. Like I said earlier, I'm not particularly a fan of difficulty hacks, yet personally found the battles in this one to be pretty enjoyable. On top of the huge amount of QOL provided, that basically removes all forms of grinding, it's one I definitely suggest to anyone who's a fan of challenging double battles. And last but not least is Pokemon Prisme. This is easily one of the most ambitious Pokemon fan projects I've probably laid my eyes on, with development beginning in 2012 and 4 regions currently available. Having played about a dozen fan games or ROM hacks with more than one region, and considering most of them share very similar issues, I was a bit skeptical at first. But I will say, despite my overall feelings of the game, it certainly doesn't suffer from a lot of those common problems. So I'll start with what I feel is the strongest point, and that's the journey. Prisme begins in the lovely region of Kanto, a place that 90% of multi-region hacks unfortunately start with. Although this time around, you'll be kicked right into a somewhat unfamiliar plot with a brand new antagonist group. I thought the writing was a bit off, but considering the English translation was just released a few days ago, I think it's better to simply leave that warning rather than giving it a concrete review at this time. Though I will say that it was certainly nice to actually have a new story, especially one that kicks off from the start, as that's something I feel many multi-region projects seriously struggle with or fail at entirely. Another core concept this game succeeds with over others like it is the adventure. Although I'm not a fan of Kanto and its subregions, the collection of both new and updated maps made them much more enjoyable to progress through. My only real complaint about the journey is that most of the 100 plus side quests you're given don't feel very rewarding to complete. Other than that, I'll give the adventure a personal score of 7.5 out of 10. Although, where I really struggled to enjoy this game was the gameplay. From the very beginning, Prisme has a lot of issues with balancing. Most of the early game is filled with enemies that significantly overlevel you, often forcing me to fill my team with Pokemon I didn't want to use, or ones that wouldn't be useful past that fight. To make things worse, on top of overleveling you, gym leaders often have some weird rule that you need to follow in order to battle them. Like Brock, for example, requires you to have a flying type at the front of your party. Since the level curve sort of evens out later on, I'll give the gameplay a 5 out of 10, though with how little QOL is offered to deal with the balancing issues, it'll have to get a personal score of 3 out of 10. Prisme is obviously a game with a huge amount of potential, yet in its current state, I feel it has way too many problems for me to properly suggest. But of course, if nothing I mentioned bothers you, then obviously I do think you should absolutely try it. But that's just about going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed, and be sure to subscribe to never miss out on any future Pokemon fan games or ROM hacks. Thank you to my channel members for their continuous support, and have a nice rest of your day.